the coach ends up, without really knowing any better, again, kind of inserting themselves in the development of the athlete, and the coach ends up kind of directing where they think the athlete should go. Obviously, sometimes this can be effective, and dare I say, even a lot of times, right? But I think the athletes that are, especially in track and field and the more technical disciplines, the athletes that were allowed to kind of grow and evolve and change on their own are more artists in a way, if that makes sense.
That was Kibwé Johnson, and you're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Today's podcast is brought to you by our longtime sponsor, SimplyFaster.com. There's two items I'd like to talk to you about today that you can find in SimplyFaster's online store. Whether you're a coach or an athlete, these are both things that you'll find highly useful as tools in your training toolbox. The first is blood flow restriction training methods. And after hearing about blood flow restriction training for years now, as well as the results that athletes are getting with it, especially in, for example, lactate sports like swimming, 100-meter freestyle, and not only hearing of that, but also seeing how much some swimmers had liked that type of training method, I knew I had to start trying it out myself. So I've been utilizing the air bands. I really enjoy it, both the feeling of training while I'm actually training with them, as well as seeing the visual result of spending time training with the methods and then the strength result. They've been a really cool training tool, and I would definitely recommend checking into air bands. SimplyFaster.com also has Be Strong brand blood flow restriction. The second item is the VMAX Pro, and this is a new option for velocity-based training, barbell tracking. It provides valuable load-based data, including speed in all phases of a lift, and it delivers key metrics such as power, velocity, distance, as well as duration of effort. The VMAX Pro system measures any lift you can think of. It's portable, durable, and intuitive. You can check out these two items and much more at our sponsor, SimplyFaster.com's online store. Let's get on to the show. Welcome to another show. Thanks for being here with us today. In my time as a coach, I've been really intrigued in thinking about technique and skill acquisition. And I've learned that technique and skill are more than just a set of instructions that coaches give or this final model to shoot for through this planned progression of drills and cues. And those, I'm not to say that those things can't be helpful, and especially for athletes who are of lower level performances or lower level abilities, or those who are unfamiliar with a particular sporting skill, learning it for the first time. Those can definitely play a large role for athletes. But once an athlete gets to a more advanced level of performance, and particularly in sports skills with a lot of technical nuance, drills and all these progressions and planned out models lose their luster. And it's at this point that it really pays to become more attuned to the actual interaction of the more subtle and deeper level interactions between an athlete and their environment, between the athlete and their implements that they're throwing, or the athlete in the ground, the athlete in gravity. Being able to sense and coordinate all these things on a deeper and more holistic and complex level, that's the epitome of artistry. And it's the thing that I think that's the thing we see on the ESPN top 10, for example, that blows us away, or in watching a highly tuned athlete who's the master of their craft. And it's that line of thinking that I've been doing a lot of that makes me so excited to have our guest today, Kibwé Johnson. Kibwé is the director of track and field at SPIRE Academy in Geneva, Ohio, and he's also the founder of FORTIUS Performance. Prior to SPIRE, Kibwé coached throws at the IMG Academy in Florida. And prior to that, Kibwé was an elite level thrower on the international level. As an athlete, Kibwé established himself as one of the United States' best hammer throwers, and his personal best of 80.31 meters in 2011 was the best mark an American hammer thrower had made in over 10 years. Kibwé is also a versatile athlete, owning the world's best or all-time best hammer throw, discus throw, weight throw combination of distances. Kibwé has personally worked with some of the most well-regarded coaches in the United States as well as internationally. Kibwé's coach for his final 10 years was Dr. Anatoliy Bondarchuk, who, if you've been listening to this podcast for some time, you've probably heard his name pop up. Dr. Bondarchuk, or Dr. B, greatly influenced the development of Kibwé's own methodologies. Kibwé's coaching philosophy is built on communication, and he cites his experiences as a husband and father with learning how to become more effective as a coach. Kibwe oftentimes talks about the Tao of the hammer. And on the show, we're going to get into Kibwe's philosophy of coaching. This show goes far beyond just implications for the hammer, a very niche event. But I love talking about the hammer because it is so unique in terms of a absolute high velocity event, a metal ball screaming around an athlete as they throw it well over 200 feet out into the sector. And when things are going at such a high velocity, and there's such room for individual differences as well, we have so much to learn from a just general technical acquisition and standpoint and all the things that can unlock artistry in one's sporting skill. On the show, Kibwe will talk about his experiences as an athlete, particularly with Dr. Bondarchuk, that helped him develop as a thrower and then in his eventual career as a coach. He'll talk about the unique high velocity and cyclical elements of the hammer that demand that relationship to the instrument and the things that we can take from that symbiotic relationship that can transfer to other skills or even life itself. Finally, Kibwe will speak extensively about the idea of drills versus holistic skill performance, and then the many subtle elements such as awareness that go into enhancing that holistic performance for athletes. So many times we just want a simple list of answers, a simple list of things to do. This is not that show, but that's what makes it amazing. And it was really awesome to have Kibwe on. He gave me so many things to think about, and I'm really grateful for the conversation we had. And let's get on to it. Episode 275 with Coach Kibwé Johnson. Kibwe, it's awesome to have you on the show. Could you start by telling me about your evolution as a coach and athlete and what led you to your philosophy, the Tao of the hammer?
Ooh, well, first, thank you for having me. Seen your podcast here and there and shared by people that I'm close with or have good working relationships with. So this is pretty cool. Personally, for me, like how I kind of set about my Tao of Hammer path, it really kind of came down to trying to find the words to explain like what I was feeling when I felt my best. Because I wasn't seeing that anywhere. I was seeing a lot of how-tos, how to throw, how to do this, how to do that, what position your body should be in, what angle your feet should be in, all of this stuff. And like, that's not to say that none of that is helpful. It is to a certain degree. But it's clear, at least to me, my opinion is it's pretty clear that it's not that helpful for greater, greater kinesthetic awareness with the event itself. You know what I mean? So like in my, shall we say, advanced age and my eyeballs, when I watch other people throw, it's clear that it's very like it's robotic. It's here, it's there, it's clear in watching them that it is very much about cues, it is very much about positions. And when you do that, the ball doesn't move efficiently, it doesn't move well. The body might, maybe, but it ends up just being really robotic. And the name of the game is the efficiency of the orbit of the hammer. And when that works well, then the whole thing works well. Really long-winded answer, but that's where I'm at.
Yeah, for sure. So I'd imagine that you had a long journey with perhaps coaches who were trying to give you more mechanical cues, get to this position. Was there any like big time, I guess, mentors or coaches either way that led you one way or the other? Like people who were telling you, I guess not to single anyone out, but like, or periods of your life where you felt like you were being overcoached, and or people who led you in a path that allowed you to feel and have more of a harmony with the hammer and what you were doing?
Well, so I mean, prior to my last and most recent coach, Dr. Anatoliy Bondarchuk, it basically came down to coaches and people like, we only know what we know, or we don't know what we don't know, kind of thing, right? So like, it's never been, from my perspective, it's never been like a put down or anything on anyone else, or even on myself, right? Because I'm part of the learning journey in those moments too. Like, we just didn't know. And, you know, I think the flip side of that is like, for the most part, everyone's always doing the best that they can or what they think is best for you. So like for me, it's like, it's all love. Like there's nothing wrong there. Um, I think what really helped in my journey with Dr. B in particular is English is like his, I don't even know how many languages he speaks. English is like his fourth language or something, right? That he taught by himself. He taught himself by reading the dictionary. So like,
That's awesome.
There was a lot of coaching with very little words. And I think that really helped me to kind of develop what was going on for me, because like, sure, he could share some words. But the words that he was sharing typically were pretty much the same words over and over again. so that left a lot for me to kind of fill in the gaps and to fill in what it is that A, I was thinking he was asking for, and B, what it was that I was trying to do myself, where, the difference being it's pretty typical that a coach will use a whole lot of words, but in all of those words, there's no space for the athlete to fill that with what their own natural, instincts are, I guess, instincts or nests or anything else. What makes that athlete as an individual amazing kind of gets stripped away with a ton of words, in my opinion.
Yeah, I met Dr. Bondarchuk, shoot, it might have been 7 years ago now. It was at Jay DeMayo's Central Virginia Sports Performance, and I could barely actually understand him as he was giving his presentation. I think I might have said something to him after, and I don't think I could understand him either. And I just try to imagine like being, it's almost like, yeah, you have to almost understand even more the underlying nuance behind what's being said or communicated, not just necessarily even the language. And it's interesting to me. It almost seems like coaches should, at least a few times in their, maybe practice a season, should almost have to do practices where they're not allowed to use words to instruct athletes or something like that. I don't know. It would be interesting if that was not the form of communication for a few practices, just to see what happens, just to see how athletes take that out, especially if you're a coach, it's like you feel obligated to say something all the time. And so I think that'd be really interesting to have like a no talking or a different language, a different form of communication day.
Yeah, totally. I think that would be great. I mean, so at my previous job in Florida, like we would have just a ton of campers roll through in the summers. And because it was fairly established, like international base to train and camp and go to school, like there were a few times where I had kids. I had some from like Japan or, countries where their understanding of English at that time, like wasn't really there. So like, I would have a camp with a kid for an entire week. And like the most that we can understand each other was like, hi, you know what I mean? And those were some of the funnest weeks I had the whole time I was there in terms of like, of having camps. It's for different reasons, but it was always like a really engaging experience when I had a camper who didn't know much English. It was hard to work for me also, to be honest, but it was fun.
Yeah, it makes me think a little bit too about, I always highlight this study. It was, I don't know if it was like a German study or what. Maybe you know the source better than I, but Franz Bosch has talked about it in one of his books where there was a group of discus throwers, and one group was they were coached by an elite level coach every throw or whatnot. And then another group was, all they knew is how far they threw, and that's it. And the results were something like the coached group improved a little bit more in the short term, but as the weeks went on or months, the uncoached group surpassed them. And the idea was that the coached group had like almost like it's the positions, they use the positions as the shortcuts, but they weren't able to unlock like the highest level technique they had, if that makes sense. I'm curious if you've seen that study or are familiar with that. I'm sure it probably makes sense given what we're talking about, but do you have any thoughts on that?
I have not read it, but I feel like it is ringing bells. Specifically, well, and I've looked over some Franz Bosch stuff, and like, yeah, and my wife's is big time into him too. But yeah, I mean, it makes perfect sense. So, I mean, for me, like, so I like to talk about the nest and like what is kind of special about each individual athlete. And like, and that's just it. The coach ends up, without really knowing any better, again, kind of inserting themselves in the development of the athlete. And the coach ends up kind of directing where they think the athlete should go. Obviously, sometimes this can be effective. And dare I say, even a lot of times, right? But I think the athletes that are, especially in like in track and field and the more technical disciplines, the athletes that were allowed to kind of grow and evolve and change on their own are more artists in a way, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? So
Oh
like
yeah,
everyone
absolutely.
knows like an athlete that you can see and it just looks a certain way. And, you know, to the layperson, it's like, oh, wow. Right. Like typically athletes like that have like longer training ages or, you know what I mean? They started when they were kids and they were just kind of allowed to move. And I think like at the end of the day and why like that discus example is so good is like they were just allowed to move and then within their own natural movement they figured out how to make it go farther, not because they're reading a book
Mm-hmm.
and you know using a checklist of the 18 positions to be in and what angle the discus should be at the end. No, I mean all that's cool. Like looking back on the experience that you just have, like I love all that stuff too. I'm pretty nerdy in that way, but I'm also like also just throw it all out and then I'll talk to you after.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, let's hop in the ring and then just get to it.
Yeah, I always remember, I have these memories from my early experiences in track and field in high school. When I was a high jumper primarily, and then did some other jumps and hurdles. But just sitting around the high jump apron, you would hear people give like cues to their, like you'd hear teammates even giving cues or coaches. And I always remember thinking to myself, like, where did you come up with the thought that this was a good idea? and that not really in the sense that I was like judging those people, but more just what they were saying I was just wondering where they got that from. Like, where did you get this idea that this was how you jump, that this is how you do this? Because I was contrasting it early on for me as a 16 or 17-year-old. Like I figured it out myself, basically. I didn't even really watch it. I kind of would watch some photo sequences. I didn't understand it a lot. I was always trying to dunk as a basketball player and just kind of endlessly played around on the high jump mat until I just figured out what worked. And I guess I always just thought to myself, well, I don't know. I just kind of figured this out on my own. Why do you need to say this and this and this to get that result? And so it was just always intriguing to me,
Yeah.
just from a young age, like just when and how to say what and when you do it. Kibwe, you said something earlier I did want to get back to. Well, before I ask you this, actually, do you feel like the hammer specifically, and the hammer is such a niche thing in the grand scheme of track, let alone all sports performance, right? But I think there's something that's so special about it in that it's like I like thinking about the idea of arcs and circles and spirals and in movement, and like the hammer is the epitome of that. Would you say that? I mean, in everything that you like the idea of flowing and kind of a harmony with whatever you're working with, like in the throwing events, would you say the hammer is like probably the one where if you try to go for positions or mechanics the most, that you'll have the worst result compared to maybe some other events where you think you could try to manufacture a little bit? I hope that makes sense.
I think it makes sense, but you can stop me if I'm not on the right path there. But I wouldn't judge it in terms of worst results. I think clearly looking back at hammer athletes and like athletes in their relationship with the hammer, you can throw far while looking like a flaming mess. um, and then and that kind of inevitably like the drug conversation would come into play there. But if we look at and maybe this is where biomechanics can come into the conversation too, is like you can um, measure right your time in single support or your releasing or release velocity Like, so for me, I would argue that those things aren't as good as someone who has that ability with the hammer. But they still might throw far, and that's just kind of the thing too, that like when I have these conversations, we kind of come up against it, right? So like, on one hand, it's not to say that there's anything wrong with whatever particular path you choose to take while throwing, right? Like, people don't want to think about the hammer this way. Cool. I mean, just have fun, right? At the end of the day, that's what it is for me. But the more that I am talking about, there's more and more people that are interested in this kind of conversation about hammer. Okay, great. Have fun. Mm-hmm. So like, let's talk about it. But I mean, yeah, it's not like not entirely result based.
Sure. The thing that I was going to ask before, so that was a little segue just with the hammer versus just other events. And I mean, I believe any sporting movement that everything that you could possibly do could adhere to principles of fluidity and the harmony with whatever, even if it's not a ball, like the ground and gravity, or if you're swimming, water tension, like it exists everywhere. And swimming was one of the events or the things I've worked with that I saw it very clearly. Like if an athlete would just slap the water as hard as they can every stroke, they're not really going to go. They're going to waste a ton of energy and get hurt. Like there's always that fine-tuned relationship with whatever you're doing, and that really helped tune me into just the idea of coaches. I think coaches are so likely to like to use positions for a lot of things. Maybe it's the simplest or the easiest. And anyway, where I was going with all this though is you mentioned positions and that they can be helpful. And so I remember when I had Ben Askren on the show, he was talking about with his wrestling academy, teaching kids like the fundamentals, but then as like a base, but then as they kind of got going, that's where he really wanted to feed the creativity in. Although I also think about like you said, the artist early on who has to figure it all out. So would you care to expand a little bit on like when like positions is probably okay, or coaching positions is probably a better idea, or will work or pass, versus when it's just not going to be a good idea?
To be honest, I'm kind of like still working through that.
Yeah, that's okay.
So like, in a way, like my first answer is like positions is tremendously helpful and for beginners, right? Mm-hmm. Day one hammer throw, to use my event as an example, you're probably not going to be successful with a kid when they show up and you say, okay, here's a hammer. Okay, now do nothing. Right. And I'm very, very aware of that, which is also why it's kind of funny to me and why I still say it. So like, there is an importance to kind of teaching like very, very base level, how do you move kind of thing. But also there's a part of me that's like, okay, but who says, like, why not? Why can't I give a hammer to a kid and then just say good luck? I've never done that before, but I gotta believe it would be pretty effective if a kid was so into the event and they just kept going at it and going at it and going at it, right? It just completely removes my opinions on what a thing should be. Which, by the way, I don't like saying should anyway. So it's one of those things that like it can work both ways. Like there's definitely, a bit of a foundation, where should your feet be in order to start a throw. If I ever have an experiment with a kid where I don't say anything, I'll be sure to document it.
I'd love to hear. Yeah, I'd love to hear that case study if you end up doing it.
Honestly, maybe I should use one of my kids. I'll use my kids.
Yeah, that's how old are your kids, by the way?
Brooklyn's 9 and Ruby just turned 6.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm watching my kids in that respect. They're not throwing the hammer, but like just whatever they do, like I really try to turn off anything that would want to tell them anything. Like
Yeah.
Like my son, I was just throwing him wiffle balls. He's 3, and he likes to just step towards the ball, like, and then swing instead of keeping his feet planted. And I just, being stupid, said, "Hey, you should keep your feet planted." But it's like, by telling him that, I'm denying him the chance to explore. It's like he's not going to figure it out, especially once you start throwing a harder ball. So I was thinking about that today, like just how will he transition from stepping towards the ball as he tries to hit it to eventually figuring it out. And yeah, so I'm always, and I wonder, like, what if I gave my child like a hammer to throw, if he was watching hammer throwers all the time. Like, I think things like walking or throwing are so, or just like a baseball type throw, are so almost like wired in, that it's different than like swinging a metal ball around yourself. But if we, from the time we learned to walk, we were swinging metal balls around our body, you would think that they probably wouldn't take a lot of coaching either.
Yeah, exactly. They would just kind of move, and you'd be like, "Why is that so beautiful?" Like, and you can tell. I mean, you look at hammer throwers over history, the ones that all started around 10 or earlier. Like, it is beautiful to watch. Which is, Americans don't tend to start that early. Americans typically don't start till they're you know college age. I was in college. Um, but something that's really nice is now, so I'll drop some names. So Rudy, who just took down the American record this past season, he started right around that age. Beautiful to watch. Connor McCullough, he started really young. Beautiful to watch.
Yeah.
Anyway, those are my two American examples. I'm sure there's other ones too. And honestly, those are guys that have happened to throw pretty far, right? I'm sure there are other ones, and you know what I mean, guys who have a beautiful movement with the hammer, but like, if you don't throw very far, then it just doesn't get seen, which is unfortunate. But like, that's part of it, and that's why, like, and that's another thing too with like Dial of Hammer and what I call the I'll call it the push force, because I like comics, the Flash, Speed Force. And my thing there is, like, when an athlete is essentially connected to that feeling and they can maintain that through the throw, you can have that feeling no matter how far you throw. You could throw 20 meters, you can throw 90 meters, you can throw fast, you can throw slow. The speed doesn't matter. All it is that connection with the energy is essentially what it is. And that's a fun thing to kind of think and talk about too, right? Because like, it's assumed that if you throw far, you have a connection, or if you don't throw far, you don't have a connection, and that's hogwash.
Yeah, it's almost like, and I've thought about this, the idea that coaching an event or even a skill, like strength coaches listening to this, or might be more just interested in sprinting or jumping or change of direction, or just, some more, I guess, some of the core primal sport skills that exist. I always feel like, and especially myself as a jumper, like there was a certain type of feeling that I feel through my foot spiraling up into my body when I hit the timing. I mean, it's funny because it's a jump. Like, no one probably thinks about this except for like maybe a few dozen people. But like, what does it feel like coming up through the foot, the force when you get into the ball of the foot at just the right time, when the ground gives its energy back? And what does that feel like? And yeah, like you said, you can take that into just about anything. And so what I was thinking about as you were saying that is, it's almost as if, I mean, yeah, like you said, positions, athletes can work with them and still get good results. But it's almost more important. This is something I've been thinking of, is that we don't, like, it's almost like building a sequence of awareness. And when athletes have a library of feelings, then they can use that. That allows them to be a lot more robust. Like how does this is what this should feel like. And then once they have that, then they can extrapolate that out in a variety of situations. Whereas otherwise, you're kind of relying on something outside of yourself a little bit more often.
Right. So it sounds like you're saying like in the moment, on any given day, any given meet day, competition day, we're different. The human body is an amazing and an extremely complex thing. And so I think the best example is, and why I don't light cues as a general idea is to teach someone to have their body in a specific situation so it impacts the event is great for that particular day. But the next day, the feeling that they received from doing that cue that you gave them is different.
Mm.
It's going to be different for almost innumerable number of reasons. You know what I mean? Least of which is like just flat out emotions, right? You're coaching teenagers and college kids. Like, it might not even be physical. It's just going to be mental. They're just not going to be there. They're not going to feel the same. So the thing is like, yes, I think cues are not the best way to go. But if it's something that's used more dynamically, and it's like, okay, well, look, so this is kind of a bit of my personal philosophy. It's like, what do I need to do to help you move the ball the best you can move on this particular day right now? As I'm watching you, what can I do to help you do what you need to do? You know what I mean? Having seen them practice before, having seen them move before. And so this is where I get into, like, I started calling hammer a movement riddle. And honestly, it might be, dare I say, all throws, or maybe even all track and field. Like, it's a movement riddle, because like that it's up to kind of yourself / the coach to figure out how to move the thing most effectively, because it does change on a daily basis.
Gotcha. So you're saying that I'd never really thought about it that way, but it does make sense. Like one day you could have a coach give you a certain cue, idea, analogy, something to feel, and then you could go out a week later and you're trying to find that analogy, and it's just not this. I do find
it just doesn't click.
Yeah, it's not the same sometimes when the person who is teaching me it isn't there too.
Yeah.
I definitely understand that.
Yeah.
So how would you say? So it's funny because I have all these questions, and I feel like just just talking about this, there's so many things to chat about, especially too with like, I mean, the Tao Te Ching, which I actually still need to get to reading, but like the first verse, right, is like that which can be explained is not the Tao. So it's like, well, this will lead to a very complicated conversation, and I think that's why it's hard for some of this stuff to truly catch on, because it's not a list of things, or it's not an easily replicable list of things, and people want an easily replicable list of things, but that's
and it's like, it's kind of like human nature. Like, humans want to be, they frankly, they just want to be told. and it's hard. It's a bit of an uphill battle to say, but I'm not going to tell you. B, and if I were the one to tell you, it wouldn't be as effective as if you just figured it out. And so, you know what I mean? And like, in my role here is to help that. I'm not saying like, I'm not going to participate, that, but it's like, it's a theory / like best case scenario. Do I coach like this on a daily basis? For the most part, but like, there is a lot that it hasn't quite, that it's not like it's me on a daily basis kind of thing. But a perfect world, yeah, it would be.
I wanted to take a break from the show and briefly share with you the difference that performance herbalism can make for you. Several years ago, I had Logan Christopher, CEO of Lost Empire Herbs, on the show to talk about hypnosis and mental training for athletes. While talking to him, I realized he also had an herbalism company. So shortly thereafter, I used the Phoenix formula, which was my first product I bought from them. I had great results with it, not only increasing my energy and decreasing my need for coffee and caffeine, but I also noticed that it was making an impact on my lifts and my weight room numbers. I was having a great training experience. Shortly thereafter, I also got into the Shilajit resin as well as other herbs. And I don't look at supplementation the same way. I'm a strong believer in what Logan and his company are doing in looking for a natural resource to boost human performance. If you want to check out the herbs that I use personally from Lost Empire Herbs, you can head to www.lostempireherbs.com/justfly. There you can get 15% off your order, and they offer a 365-day money-back guarantee. Definitely check them out. Let's get on back to the show. Yeah, I think about everything that, I guess you could say, like if you're in the private sector and you're trying to sell someone coaching or a program, it would be really hard to sell that program saying, this program will teach you to have more awareness and figure things out yourself, and you're probably going to be confused a lot, but it's all a journey. And like that, as opposed to the program that's like guaranteed, you're going to jump this much higher and follow these steps exactly. And this is the standard you need to achieve to be X, Y, Z. And it's not, I mean, again, I do believe in like key performance indicators and like all the stuff and the transfer of training and that kind of thing. But in terms of the actual process and technique, that's, and I've done presentations where I go into this. It's almost like you have the masculine qualities and feminine, and the masculine is like categorizing, transfer trainer, training, KPIs, but then we treat everything in coaching like it's that quantitative, like it's all a list. And it's like, well, no, as soon as you kind of start to draw the line and get into the actual execution of things, you have to start thinking from a very different mindset. You have to kind of throw all the listing tendencies out, and it's a hard break I think, to make.
Exactly. And that's where the kind of magic of coaching and frankly being an athlete lies, is like, because both are needed, right? Masculine, feminine, yin yang, whatever you want to talk about, both are needed, but then there's points when one is absolutely not needed versus the other, and vice versa. And it's a matter of trying to work that out for yourself.
Yeah, for sure. So if I were to ask, like I made the joke that which can be named is not the Tao, but if you were to say, like, what are some key qualities that, like, you talk about the Tao of the hammer, if there was concepts that were really important to that. I know you had a post once talking about like as hard as a diamond, as flexible as a blade of grass. Is there any, we just kind of talked about lists being more of the masculine, but is there any sort of kind of list or some core principles that you would put with the idea of the Tao of the hammer and really just coaching movement in general?
So like what my suggestion is to learn from a Tao of Hammer perspective?
Oh, yes. Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I probably made that question way more complicated than it had to be.
No, it's okay. And plus it helps my brain too. So my answer to that is awareness and intention and focus, that kind of thing. It's for the athlete to set that, and all of it has to do with the hammer. So the relationship with hammer and person. And if athlete can decide and kind of know that it's not athlete and hammer, or athlete or hammer, or you know what I mean, it's not two pieces, it's one piece of the same system. And doing that, and you kind of keep that focus alive to be able to move with the thing. Because otherwise, because what's normally taught is like, do this drill for half hour and that drill for another half hour, and then you got to follow these three things, and this is how it's supposed to look based on this one guy who was 5'10" in the 80s and he threw 86 meters, and now you're supposed to do that even though you just started and you're throwing a 6K as opposed to a 16-pound, and you're 6'5", right? Like all of these things, like none of that matches up when you look at trying to learn something, let alone do it well. And it's faith. It's faith that kind of what you're doing is the best way to go about it for you as an athlete. And that's kind of where it ends for me. I think it's just like, meditative awareness, like around the hammer itself, and to try to tune out a lot of things where people are saying what it should be, needs to look like, yada yada.
Yeah, it's almost like I've heard the idea, just speaking really philosophically, I may have mentioned this on this show at some point, and I'm probably going to butcher it because it's been too long since I heard it, but the idea that if you're speaking to a child and a young child who's observing nature, and as soon as you label something in nature and say, this is this, like you almost kind of limit their imagination and what could be the possibility of that thing. And I feel like it's probably pretty similar with a lot of any sports skill that you could do. That actually got me away from I used to love baseball and pitching. And I remember I just had a coach when I was like 10 or 11 who's like, no, stop doing it like that. This is how you pitch. And it flustered me so much that was the end of pitching. And then I made a little comeback with javelin in college, which was fun. But it's really when you say meditative awareness, maybe we can go into that, because I think that, again, so many coaches view a skill and it's like, okay, you're going to do X, Y, Z. And again, I'd actually like to talk about what you think about special strength too, because that's been something that I've been thinking of with where does that fit in, because that's a more masculine kind of thing. It's a constraint. But I want to ask you about that. But first, I guess like when people say, well, how do you meditate? Right? Like, well, it's awareness and breath, right? It's not, you're not sitting there looking at a list of, okay, I need to do, like, you just start with that awareness. And so how can you explain a little bit more about the meditative awareness and how that goes into the beginning of your technique session, or how that goes, or just how does that fit into your technical acquisition for your athletes?
Yeah, I mean, at its core, it is kind of like you said, like it's very simple. And so as an example, it could be walking up to the ring. I'll use myself as an example. Walking to the ring, you know what I mean? I'm breathing, I'm feeling the air around me. My steps, I'm sitting down, I'm taking my shoe off, right? And it's like it's just being intentional with my movement, and that in itself is meditation. Like it does kind of get this bad rap, I think, or at least it's maybe not a bad rap per se, it's just misunderstood. Whereas as it relates to like hammer movement, I think it is as simple as that, and it's just basically kind of opening yourself up to really feeling what's happening with your body and space, and your mind too, honestly, as opposed to just kind of moving and not knowing how you got there, which in today's world, especially with, these giant computers in our pockets and social media, like it just kind of ends up being that way. And so there's a way to kind of slow that down and back it up and just pay attention.
Yeah, I think that would be just more mentally relaxing too, versus, like you said, you have the computer in your pocket. And when I was coaching track as a full-time at college, when I started, I actually had this was like almost 15 years ago. And so smartphones weren't around yet. And to actually video people, you had to get out the recorder, and it was just, so I just didn't do it. But once I started getting my, the phone and all the apps and stuff like that, it's so easy just to coach purely on okay, do the thing. Okay, film it on the phone. All right, now what did it look like? Okay. And again, I think it's good for athletes to watch, just to see, but almost to have, sometimes I almost think it's better for them to see without you saying anything, the coach saying anything. And anyway, but yeah, like you were saying, it's just, it with all the ways you can analyze from a quantitative perspective, it just makes it almost pushes us more away from qualitative. Just, like you said, having awareness, having intention. It was the inner game of tennis and with Timothy Galway, and then where he just talks about just noticing, just notice how the ball's spinning while it's coming into the racket. I've had coaches, and that set me off on a quite a tangent, but I've had coaches coach me in skills just saying, just pay attention to your feet. Okay, now pay attention to your knees, your thighs, pay attention to your arms, your trunk, your spine, and just going almost through the whole series of all these joints. And just by saying, notice all these things, they would a lot of them would just clean up on their own. Just you draw attention, you put awareness there, and whatever was happening, the body would kind of go in and clean up the quality of that movement without without even thinking of what was good movement on my own end, as the performer of the movement.
Right.
So I think.
Well, and that's the other thing too, is like the individual, there is an energy of, or a path rather, of movement that feels good to them, and then when they hit it, they know it. So it's a perfect example of like something might feel amazing to an athlete, and I'm not talking about like beginners here, but like even so, maybe why not, right? But like, someone who's fairly seasoned and they end up doing something that feels great, and then a coach is like, no, like you did this, this, and this, and it's all like superficial things that basically, to the coach's eye, it didn't compare to that one guy he saw 30 years ago. That sort of thing, I just kind of got to a point where I was like, that doesn't make sense to me. That doesn't make sense.
Yes. Yeah. Like that's something I've been thinking about a lot is with both performance, and then even like I'm trying to get more into like the corrective world, and which is a real deep dive into a lot of different ways joints work. And my brain works macro to micro way more than micro to macro. And my hack to it, at least as I've been thinking about it, is, well, if I'm having an athlete do, I guess you could say, quote unquote, a corrective, like it should just feel good. Like it shouldn't feel hard. Like whatever they're doing, if the thing they're doing feels too difficult or clunky or mechanical, then maybe I'm not setting it up right. And I think about, or even just I like doing a lot of work combining strength with basic like hard balance disc, like hard point balance discs, and thinking about letting the body choose a path that feels easy. And because it's almost like we were set up to say, well, it should feel hard. Like this should feel difficult. Like it's the learning process. And then the next thing that's invariable to come in, it might not feel good now, but just do it for like 2 months and then it'll be great. And and
as a means to justify like what the coach is saying, like, this is how it is. It's going to suck now, but like, you'll be good. Well, okay. I don't know. And like, and I feel like in recent times I can't really think of any, well, I'm sure they exist in track and field events, but like there's like some NFL, there's quarterback examples, right? There's guys who have been quarterbacks and everyone's like, oh, their throwing motion sucks. And it's like, it looks like this, he'll never survive. I'm not talking about Tebow, actually. Well, whatever. I'm not talking about Tebow. Colin Kaepernick is an example. Okay. The first few years and 49ers are my team. So I have background here. And they had some success. They had some really great success. And then they like kind of went to the lab, right? And they were like, we're going to improve his QB mechanics and we're going to get him these QB gurus and he's going to throw like a quarterback. Following year, worst year ever. And like, and frankly, never got it back again. And then everything else that happened, right? But like there was a direct correlation between them trying to make him throw like a quarterback, whatever that is, and his QB efficiency. It was terrible. And that has happened with so many people. And honestly, it's mostly quarterbacks in football. Donald Thomas, another example, high jumper. You remember him?
Oh, I jumped against him at I jumped against him at the national meet when I was like a junior or senior. Yeah,
my man wins Worlds, and it was 2007. This was my first Worlds team. Wins World, beats Stefan Holm from Sweden, and Stefan was pissed. Did you ever see the documentary that was basically of the two of them and like how this basketball playing guy comes and jumps really high and becomes a world champ, and Stefan Holm, who's a machine, right? And gets beat, and it just really, anyway. And next season, it was like, well, if this guy who just kind of showed up, right, we're going to teach him how to high jump. we're going to teach him how to really high jump. And what happened? Like a few years where it was just not good again.
Yes.
And then I think eventually he kind of found his way, and like he made a bunch more teams. But it's like it's that same system where an athlete moves how they already move, and then they're told that's not how you should move. You need to do this. And we lose so my point with that is like we lose so many athletes to that because we have this one size fits all system that a lot of people are thrown into. And then there's some that have success. But like the artists, like the masters that come out of that, like they just end up getting, you know, what's it, attrition? Like they just fall off, never to be seen from again.
Yeah, it's just another example, I think, of painting something that should be a yin or a feminine with a masculine or a yang brush. And just, this is, yeah, I've heard that so many times. When that person gets technique, they're going to be so good. It's like,
Yeah.
well, what do you mean by technique?
And I was one of those athletes, and I used to listen to it like, yeah, I need better technique, right? Like I was a, you know, toot my own horn, I was a really great athlete trying to throw things. And when I went to with Dr. Bondarchuk, I became a hammer thrower. So like, you know, like with Judd, I felt like Superman. You couldn't tell him, you couldn't do nothing to me. Physically. Like I could do it all. And my hammer was like, okay. I mean, I was good for the United States. I was either first or second every year I was with Judd. And then it kind of occurred to me that like, but I don't really want to do this to be the best in the US. Right. And that was kind of a driver to going with Dr. B. And like, when that happened, I felt like I couldn't do anything else but throw a hammer. But, you know, that's what I was training for. So like, I just find it funny. There was no complaint about it. I just find it funny where I went to feeling like I can do anything with my body to doing nothing but throw.
Yeah, the generalist versus specialist type of topic.
Mm-hmm.
So with just like within the course of a session, if you have an athlete who is making, or I guess, how do you define mistakes, right? Like an athlete is throwing and they're doing something that doesn't fit with like the bandwidth of a high level thrower, and you want to move them there. Like what's the process of doing that? Would you try to find that in the special strength? Like I alluded, like talking about special strength, would you try to use a different way of throwing to bring them back? Is there an awareness tool? I mean, I'm sure there's lots of ways, right? But like, what are some of the paths that you go down? Because I this is important. I think people like to use hyperbole or create like these straw mans and say, oh, well, you don't believe in coaching techniques, so everything's just a free for all, right? And like, I mean, sometimes, yeah, maybe it should be a free for all, but not, obviously there needs to be at some point, like ideally an intervention. And so what are some ways that you go about being mindful of how to intervene with athletes who are outside of these bandwidths of what good performers are utilizing?
I think one of the lessons that I took from Dr. B is being open to anything and education and observation. So like, it's kind of on me to to observe and experiment and see what's up. So I think at any given moment, like there's probably several things that could be done to help the athlete. Whether that's a change in program, a change in how I speak to them, being more vocal with what I have to say about how they're throwing, or stepping back, you know what I mean, and letting them kind of do it. So this is kind of one of those answers where it's like anything really.
Sure. Yeah. How do you coach? Open-ended. Go.
Yeah. It's like, it's open-ended but it's like it for me, I would kind of cycle through what I thought would be most effective. And, you know, the Rolodeck, if you will, if those even exist anymore, was like, is those pieces. And then I just kind of feel my way with what I think would work best. That's kind of my answer.
Sure. Yeah. And maybe I can share some of my own thoughts, and you could like just piggyback or tell me what you think about these things. I feel like I've kind of gravitated towards, yeah, like there's the awareness, like just be aware of this, you know, section or body part or whatever. There's like, yeah, do the thing a little differently option, like use a different implement, use a different surface, use a different, slightly different objective. And then, like some rhythm based stuff. Like I like playing with rhythms for different ground based things. I'm sure the hammer, there's a ton of things like that. Yeah. I like having an athlete do a part of the movement, say, feel this, feel what this feels like, and then go do the whole thing. I mean, do you have any like getting beyond awareness? Like, do you use like any like contrasting things? Like, you might have an athlete do a special strength and go back to the hammer, or is there anything you'll use like contrasts? I guess maybe I'll put it to that. Do you use any like contrasting sensory stimuli to help people with the hammer throw?
I don't think I'm pretty sure I've never done that as a coach, and I don't believe I did that as an athlete either. Not from a hammer perspective.
Okay.
Like in the gym, physically speaking, yes. Now you got my brain going. I wonder if that would be something fun to do.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, let me know. I'm
but it's like, I mean, I don't know. Maybe honestly, maybe like kind of a little bit, but I haven't spent much time doing it. So like that would come down to like, a wind and release or a putter release or some form of release that is meant to mimic either the entry of a hammer or the release of a hammer, and then going into actually throwing again. So I guess somewhat I've done that a little bit with my last group. And it's more, the idea is to kind of help them to feel a little bit more tension, essentially, like the tension that is present when they're connected in that way.
Yeah, I feel like the hammer too. The hammer's got to be a tough one because it's just like you have to get the body in motion and it's circulating versus like I coached javelin for a while. I threw it. I blew my elbow up throwing it. But I would like. I feel like javelin wasn't too difficult to just teach. Like to just rehearse the moment the front block leg hits the ground. Like you can create that pretty easily. It's not like you don't have to have a huge body in motion to do that, and you can do it rhythmically. And it's a lot simpler. I feel like to chunk like little pieces of some of the other throws or any sports skill, whereas the hammer is this big spinning thing that has a lot already moving at any given time. It seems like it's a lot more whole versus some other sports skills can be a little more part of the whole system, relatively speaking. At least
which is exactly why, the absolute best case scenario to improving the hammer is to just throw the hammer.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where the conversation begins and ends. And then, yes, of course, there are drills and things that you can do, but like, I'll get asked that question and like, what can I do to do this? Throw. What can I do to do this? Throw. Because essentially people are asking, it's one of those like leading questions that I used to be more sensitive to and accommodate for, I guess. And now I just kind of answer how I choose to answer, which is like, no, just do this, and it's because more often than not, they're asking that question, like either thinking they know the answer or expecting some form of drill for me to suggest for them to do the thing. And it's like, well, if you're a hammer thrower of any experience level, like at this point in the game, like you've already done all the drills.
Yeah.
Like there's no new drill that a hammer thrower is going to do, and it's going to bingo, I've got it. Okay, great, thanks. You just got to throw, and you have to experience the whole thing together to figure out where feelings are and where they aren't.
Yeah. The thing that I'm thinking of now is it's like drills can get you part of the way. They can get you part of the way, but as the complexity level goes up, like there's just becomes a point where they can't. And I think about like a high jump takeoff, or even the final, like the block of a javelin throw, like where you have this long, rigid lever coming down into the ground at a very horizontal vector. And it's like, you can't do this in like hurdle hops. Like the vector is totally different. And you have too many moving pieces. You have the body working asymmetrically as well in this last plant step or a block. So it's not something you can do rhythmically and symmetrically either. And so it's very hard to come up with drills to those things that are just so complex. And then it just gives me even more respect for those athletes who can do them. And that's what makes them elite, because they kind of transcend the drills. It's like you have the drills and you have the athletes who transcend the drills. And I feel like the only way you get there is through the factors that are dig into more the yin, the feminine, the things that can solve the problem on the fly, and that require just massive levels of awareness and even almost like risk aversion, or not risk aversion, the opposite of that, like they're willing to take risk from a joint perspective and speed and velocity and those kind of things.
Yes, that's precisely hammer.
Yeah, what's that thing's going?
like you know what I mean? Like to like, how do you know when you're doing it right? Is like you're teetering. You're on the edge. You're at the edge. And up until that point of the push force, as I call it, up until that point feels generally pretty terrible. and then you got it, and then it's great, right? And then beyond that point, it feels pretty. Beyond that point, not that it feels terrible. Beyond that point is usually when you fall or something crazy happens.
Yeah.
But that's hammer in a nutshell. It's a ride.
Yeah.
It'll teach you stuff. It'll teach you anything about everything.
Yeah, that should be part of the general. I mean, I'm a strong believer that physical things should be a bigger part of educational curriculums, because I think that physical things can teach you about things in life. But I can imagine with the hammer, it's if you're getting out of your comfort zone. I'm sure once that thing's spinning around, you just see people go flying.
Exactly. Well, and that's just it too, right? So, having already talked about like formerly being a really self-described really, really great athlete, the hammer does not care. I was a really great athlete, and like that hammer, like it doesn't go just because you're a great athlete. It doesn't go just because you want it to go far. You know what I mean? Like you got to work with it, and you got to be part of it for the most efficient results, the maximum result.
Yeah,
doesn't care how strong you are. You can be enormously strong. There's so many like people who are really, really, really strong and can't throw hammer any distance worth mentioning. It's it's cool.
That's why, that's one of the things that I love about like what you're saying about the hammer. And one of the things that really drew me to your philosophy too is so often we just try to, well, what's the solution? We'll just get stronger and then learn the fundamentals, quote unquote, aka the positions associated with the event better, and that'll get you better. And it's like, well, that only works up to a point, and then beyond that point, you need something else to really like use all of your human machinery in the optimal way.
Yeah.
So I know we just got a couple minutes left. I did want to feel free to answer this as short or long as you like. But everything with the hammer and some things you've mentioned is I wanted to ask you about reactivity. And I think a lot about the it's almost like you have the yang of conscious trying to volitionally do something in a skill, and then on the yin you have you're reacting to something. And tell me about like just reactivity in hammer throw, and how do you is that anything you bring awareness to, or anything you try to I gotta just say make a big deal of, but like is that something that comes up in your coaching sessions?
I think indirectly, yes. So like the way hammer is traditionally taught, and I would say all the throwing events is it's active. Everything is active. Do this, do that. Or don't do this, don't do that, as if the brain doesn't hear that as do this, do that, which is another conversation.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
And so it's become clear to me in the last however long that the most efficient ways to move with the implement is or how do I say that, to maximize like the power that's available, right? Like within the athlete. It doesn't come as well when they are actively trying to, and hammer, people say push. You know what I mean? And it's a very active thing to like try to move the hammer from a frankly fairly egoic place. I'm going to do this to this hammer, therefore it's going to go far. And again, for some people, it works relatively well. I come from the position of, if there is a way to do it most efficiently, that's the way I choose to do it. So even in this conversation, I'm not, you know what I mean? I'm not telling anyone to do anything. It's just, this is how I think of it. Here's a bit of a why. I think it's amazing. But like, you know, carry on kind of thing. So the idea of kind of like, you know, doing nothing, as in like the Tao, that stems from, you know, the athlete is involved in setting up the throw and then starting it. And for hammer in particular, when the hammer starts and then the orbit of the hammer starts going, then frankly the athlete doesn't need to do anything else. Okay, so we're talking about the best picture scenario here with a throw, and the hammer doesn't need to do anything else. And so when the system is going and the athlete doesn't do anything else, they are already in a stronger position to react and to move and to adapt to whatever it is that the hammer does as it screams around you in its orbit. That makes sense? So like basically by removing myself, the hammer is free to do whatever it needs to do. And I'm free to react to it. So usually what's discussed as it relates to like how a hammer turns with the body and whatnot is like how to step and where to step. Like so as for a right handed thrower, you're supposed to turn and then you got to step. People want to say step here, step there, step faster. And again, these are the active cues that can be helpful to some people, but for the most effective throw, it's not the one. And it's really interesting that that's the case. It's just hammers full of paradoxes. Like it's up and down the board. It's just all paradoxes. And so, you know, I'll share this like as an example. When I hear, I'll see coaches, you know, like you gotta, you know what I mean? You gotta get your foot off the ground fast. You can put it down fast. Well, the video is there from any number of athletes that the athletes who are cued to do so and actually try to actively remove their foot from the ground and put it down fast in the name of the catch, right? The catch being like when the right foot comes down, you want the ball to be somewhere out in the sector. And when this happens, it's never where they say the hammer is going to be. So it's another one of those situations where it dawns on me and I'm like, why the hell are we still saying this? It doesn't make sense. Hey, if you do this with your feet, your hammer is going to be a beautiful catch and into the sector. Yeah, but it wasn't. Okay. And then next throw, it's not. Next throw, it's not. And it's not. And this is everybody. Mm-hmm. Everyone who's like thinking I'm going to move my feet this way so I can catch my hammer this way. It never happens. It's actually late every time. And you're essentially just kind of spinning around in circles. Okay. Yeah, that's a bit of a tangent there, but
no, it's okay. It right when you were talking, it got me thinking about that. In the movie I Love You, Man, where like Jason Segel's trying to surf and Paul Rudd's like this hippie trying to instruct him. He's like, do less, do nothing.
Do less. No, that was too much. Stand up.
I'll have to put that in the show notes. I think about that often with the idea of doing nothing, but I feel like hammer has got to be, I like something that I saw I think you wrote this on Twitter, but it's almost like you start the throw and then everything that you do to the hammer or everything you are like trying to do to it from that point on is going to take away from the throw. And
yep. Mm-hmm.
I love that because I think I think the hammer, maybe if you look at the spectrum of passive versus active, like there's, passive forces or active forces spinning around that you're a part of. Maybe it's a little bit less in like a different track and field skill or a different human skill, but I think it's still there. It's definitely still there. And I I just like the idea of taking your ego out of it and looking of your body, or being like an observer of your body with the whatever environment it is. Maybe it's just your feet in the ground or whatever. But and even like even the first time I ever heard, I don't know, when I was like maybe 25, I heard like the idea of sprinting, push the ground away in acceleration, and I was like, why would you have to tell an athlete to do that? Like, isn't that something your brain just does? Like, isn't that something that's automatic? I mean, yeah, I'm sure, there's some athletes it has to help out a little bit, maybe very muscle-driven athletes or something like that, who that's their language. But I'm like, that can't be the best way to run, to have to tell the brain to act, as egoically against this. And not ego, like, I have a big ego if I'm doing it, but just like me pushing against this thing versus embracing the timing and letting the body just work as a fluid movement.
Right. Well, and yeah, not to really belabor that, but like for my personal philosophy too, is like is telling everyone the same thing. That also seems like nonsense. Like, I don't understand why you would coach everyone the same way, train everyone the same way. Everyone's different. Yeah, it's so, going back to hammer a little bit, right? Like, so when people talk about hammer and what should and shouldn't be this and that, and because Dr. Bondarchuk was so prevalent, or is so prevalent in the entire conversation, both from like coaching wise and also just results, is like, I mean, that's just what he's talked about. And so the examples get to be, well, like, you got to do it like this. And then usually people, traditionally talk about like Yuri or Sergey, one being a 3-turner, the other being a 4-turner. And it's like, okay, that's great. But like, Dr. B didn't coach them the same. And so these are kind of bits that people don't really know or understand, because of like the Soviet system, and then it broke up, and then he's also Ukrainian and everything else. And like, it's not the same. And so when I had this conversation, I'm like, look, I think Dr. B is credited with like, I don't know, 13, 14, 80-meter guys or something like that. Some of them came through the system. I think he's credited with 8, where he basically coached from fairly zero. I got to him with a 75-meter PR. Okay. So, but my point is like, between 8 and 13 80-meter guys, right? 80 meters is gold standard and hammer throw. Not a single one of us looked the same. He allowed for everybody's individual ness again to come through, and and everyone threw really far based on like what it is that we were either good at or allowed the ball to do, or whatever else. Excuse me, as opposed to people who are just like, this is the system, this is how I coach. And you can see it too, right? Like there's coaches out there where every one of their kids will look the same. Come on. And it'll work for, maybe 20% of them. And then the rest of them either just kind of wash out or just absolutely never reach their potential. They're just kind of throwing,
Yeah, the 20% succeeded who that model fit what they were. The 80% it didn't, never going to reach their potential.
Yeah. And it's kind of, it's kind of sad, because thinking beyond the sport itself, like the part of that journey and like self-discovery and all of that is being able to grow, to tap into all that. And got a bit of a pet project where that's kind of my angle, and is like, it's one of those things in life, in art, that you choose. You can choose anything, but when I guess like the opportunity basically is kind of stripped from you, then like you lose that opportunity to learn about yourself. Maybe we could do a follow-up.
Yeah. No,
I'm kind of just thinking that out loud. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of good.
No, that was good. Yeah. Like, oh, absolutely. Like, I was even thinking with my son, who's 3, like when I tell him to do, to have his feet planted, I devoid him of the opportunity to learn the consequence of stepping or how to self-correct and everything that goes with that and into life. I mean, there's so much so many ways we could take this. I know you're out of time here. I would love to keep the conversation going, but thank you so much, Kibwe, for being on the show. You will have to, in the meantime, before we hopefully talk again in the near future, we do another podcast. If you do that experiment on a very young hammer thrower and just let them spin the ball around and see what happens, I would be really interested in the results of that. So,
yeah, totally. I'll do that.
All right. Sounds good. Well, hey, I appreciate your time today. Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is great.
Thanks for tuning in with us to another episode. We'll see you next week.